In this video, I'm going to show how to change out the rear brake pads on a 2012 Toyota FJ Cruiser. I'm using Toyota genuine part number 04466-60090, which contains 4 disc brake pads. Jack up the truck so that the tire is off the ground. You'll want to place a jack stand underneath the jack point on the side of the tire that you're working on. Remove the plastic wheel cap and remove the 6 lug nuts with the 17mm socket. Once all 6 are out, the wheel can be removed. Using the same 17mm socket, remove the 2 slide pins that hold the caliper to the rotor. It's a good idea to loosen up the bottom pin first so that the caliper won't swing over and potentially damage the brake hose. Bear in mind that some manufacturers have different sized bolts, and you should be careful to note which slot each bolt goes into. Luckily, these Toyota bolts are exactly the same length. Next, remove the caliper, placing it to the side, being careful not to let the brake hose twist, bend, or hang. Pry off the old brake pads from each side of the rotor. The brake pad on the inner side of the rotor has a brake wear indicator plate, which needs to be removed and placed on the new inner pad. If you're experiencing any wobble or pulsation while braking, that probably means your rotor may be warped and it will need to be refinished with a grinder or replaced in general. If there aren't any wobbles, ensure that the rotor is clear of any debris or rust using brake cleaner and a clean shop towel before replacing any pads. Add some anti-squeal paste or moly grease to the back side of the new brake pads before placing the shim on. This not only prevents vibration, which can lead to squeaking, but also helps keep the shim firmly planted on the brake pads. Be careful not to get any grease on the face of the pad that makes contact with the rotor. At this point, it can be helpful to check your brake fluid level. You'll notice that once you remove the piston, your brake fluid level in the master cylinder should dip a little bit. The piston will eventually need to be compressed back in, and once that happens, your brake fluid level should be back to normal. Next, we'll need to compress the piston back into place in order to get it back on the caliper. I used the disc brake spreader and an old brake pad in order to push it back in. Now that the piston is back in place, you'll notice that your brake fluid level should be back to normal. It's usually a good idea to keep an eye out on your brake fluid levels whenever you're under the hood, like when you're changing your oil, for example. It can be a good indicator on whether or not your brakes are getting low. Before I place the new brake pads in place, I'm going to lubricate the parts of the brake pad that will make contact with the caliper bracket using the same anti-squeal paste. Be careful again not to get any paste on the side of the pad that makes contact with the rotor. It's good to note that both of the brake pads on the FJ are interchangeable, meaning that the inner and outer pads are exactly the same. The pad with the wear indicator should always be placed on the inner or back side of the rotor. Take some silicone lubricant and insert some into the rubber boots. Silicone lubricant is important because it won't dry out rubber. You can also coat the pins with a little bit of silicone lube before reinserting. Now you can reinstall the caliper, making sure to align the rubber boots through the holes. Properly lubricated pins should slide in and out of the assembly without resistance. Once the pins are in, torque them down to 60 pound-foot of torque. It's worth noting that once the disc brake assembly is back in place, there will be a little bit of play. Once the brake job is done, you're going to need to depress the brake pedal a few times in order to get the piston back out. Doing so will get rid of that extra slack. Now it's time to put the wheel back on. Replace the lug nuts until they're finger tight. Then tighten the lug nuts in a star pattern so as to secure the wheel evenly. You don't want to tighten in a circular pattern because that might cause slight unevenness to the mounting and therefore could eventually lead to rotor warping. Finally, remove the jack stand and lower the truck before torquing to spec using the same star pattern as before. The Toyota manual recommends 83 pound-foot of torque. Repeat the same process on the other side. The final step is one of the most important steps that can sometimes be overlooked. Go in and press the brake pedal all the way down as far as you can until it stops. Pump it again until you feel some resistance. What this is doing is that it's pushing the piston back into place to enable proper braking pressure when you apply your brakes. Failing to do this step could lead to potentially dangerous situations on the road in which you won't have enough pressure to apply brakes. I hope this video was helpful in showing you how to change your rear brake pads in your FJ Cruiser. This process should be fairly similar in most other vehicles as well. Once again, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you on the next video.